Jim Crow once divided the nation, but civil rights champions rose up to clarify that all are entitled to equal protection under the law. There is a difference between. We will hold this president accountable for his stunning abuse of power. We will hold this president accountable for undermining our national security. We will hold this president accountable. Donald John Trump, we will clarify that in America, no one is above the law.
The gentleman yields back.
From California, Mr. McClintock.
Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, nullifying a national election requires an overwhelming case of high crimes supported by indisputable compelling. Now, Article 1 is a made-up crime called abuse of office. It does not charge that the president broke any law, but that Congress doesn't like the way he lawfully discharged his constitutional duties. At the pleasure of Congress, destroying the separation of powers at the heart of our Constitution. Article 2 is another made-up crime called obstruction of Congress. It means the president sought to defend of his office. It removes the judiciary from our Constitution and places Congress alone in the position of defining the limits of its own. It guarantees every American the right to confront their accuser, to call witnesses in their defense, to be protected from hearsay, and to defend these rights in court. The Democrats have trampled them all through court. The Democrats' hand-picked witnesses provided no first-hand knowledge the president leaked aid to action. In fact, 2 witnesses provided first-hand knowledge that he specifically ordered, charged no actual crime, and offered no legally admissible evidence would be laughed out of court in a heartbeat. That's the case before us today. It would redefine the grounds for impeachment in such a way that assures that it will become a constant presence in our Democrats' chant of resist by any means necessary. This is a stunning abuse of power and a shameless travesty of justice that will stain the reputations of those responsible for generations to come. I yield back.
Abuse of power was no vague or weak notion to the framers. It had a very specific meaning: the use of official power to obtain an improper personal benefit while ignoring or injuring the national interest. President Trump has abused. I now yield 2 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Cohen.
The gentleman is recognized.
In a special nation, a city upon a hill. Our values are enshrined in our Constitution: liberty, equality, and opportunity. We are a self-governing people where every person is equal before a king. We choose our leaders. We vote. Generations of Americans have fought, and some have died, to secure these inalienable rights. It's not we, the leaders of Russia, Ukraine, or China, or we, the Democrats, or we, the Republicans. It's we, the people of the United States, and all Americans, and only Americans, get to have a say in our elections. Donald Trump used the high power of the primary political opponent. He corrupted our elections and compromised our national security so that he could keep power. Not power for the people, power for himself. In 2016, if you are listening, in 2019, President Trump sought foreign interference when he needed a favor from Ukraine to intervene in the 2020 elections. President Trump attacked in his free and fair elections. Like all of you, I took an oath to support and defend the Constitution. I urge my colleagues to abide by that oath and stand up for the obstruction of Congress. To my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, I appeal to your patriotism and implore you to defend free and fair elections and America. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back, and the gentleman and all members are reminded to address their comments to the chair. The gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I do believe, Mr. Speaker, that our elections should be free and fair, based on the fact that the Speaker, who said in this month, last month, it would be dangerous to leave it to the voters to determine if Mr. Trump stays in office. With that, I yield a minute and a half to the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Higgins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have descended into the belly of the beast. I have witnessed the terror within, and I rise committed to oppose. America is being severely injured by this betrayal, by this unjust and weaponized impeachment brought upon us by the same socialists who threaten unborn life in the womb, who threaten First Amendment rights of conservative American patriot, and who have long ago determined that they would organize and conspire to overthrow President Trump. We don't face this horror because the Democrats have all of a sudden become constitutional. Some surreal assertion of the socialists' newfound love for the very flag that they trod upon. We face this horror because of this map. This is what the Democrats people. They are deep establishment D.C. They fear. They call this Republican map flyover country. They call us. They fear our unity. They fear our vote. And they fear our president. We will never surrender our nation to career establishment D.C. politicians and bureaucrats. American patriots shall prevail. Mr. Speaker, I yield.
The gentleman yields back.
I reserve.
The gentleman from.
I yield 2 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Johnson.
The gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Johnson, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was not among those who impeachment today because our president is, as we speak, abusing his power and placing himself above the law. President Trump's attempt to sabotage the 2020 election is a clear and more Americans support impeachment today than at any time since Richard Nixon's final weeks in office. We know that it's wrong to enlist the help of foreigners in interfering in our what's at stake. It's not just that our elections were attacked. Our elections are under attack right now. The very day the Judiciary Committee Rudy Giuliani back to the White House, President Trump is still at it. He's doubling down. He doesn't think he can win an election fair and square, so he's trying to cheat. It's giving him a green light. Those who vote against impeachment are not just endorsing President Trump's past actions, but his future ones as well. Be undermined. I'd urge you to come down to Georgia, find a black man or woman of a certain age, and they'll tell you the danger is real. And they'll tell you of brave Americans, patriots willing to risk, sometimes died, so that we could have fair and free elections. We're not asked to possess even a fraction of their courage. We're simply called upon today to do what's right.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm glad that my colleague, Madam Speaker, just mentioned Georgia, because since 2014, the actual voter participation among minorities, Hispanic male and Hispanic female, have risen double digits. I'm very proud of what Georgia's doing to get everybody to the poll. I'm glad he chose to highlight it. Unfortunately, he just highlighted it in the wrong way, and I will not yield. Madam Speaker, I yield.
Gentleman's recognized for a minute and a half.
Gentleman from Georgia. Madam Speaker, back home, people refer are completely detached from what's going on in communities across America. Many here don't hear or listen to what people are saying, and many here as well think they know better than the people we serve. Our communities are benefiting greatly from President Trump's agenda: a booming economy, secure borders. Inside the halls of Congress, Democrats' obsession with impeachment is all-consuming. Is this how Democrat leadership chooses to represent the people of America? By nullifying the results of the 2016 election? Everything in their power to prevent the president and this Congress from doing the job we were elected to do? After 3 years of trying meetings, Democrats have delivered 2 weak articles of impeachment. Abuse of power? Not according to the Ukraine. President Zelensky confirmed many times that the aid was delivered without anything in return. Of course, his words have been conveniently dismissed. Obstruction of Congress? Is this the new standard? If this is the new standard, then every president since Jimmy Carter. Be clear, it is an honor to serve in the United States House of Representatives, but today I am distraught. Today, Democrats will disregard the will of the American people and vote to impeach the duly elected President of the United States, which should be equally the trust the American people have in the 116th Congress.
Gentleman from New York.
I yield back. I reserve.
President Trump said no quid pro quo only after the White House learned of the whistleblower complaint and after the Washington Post had published an article about the president's pressure campaign on Ukraine. Lady from California, Ms. Bass.
Gentlelady is recognized for 2 minutes.
Madam Speaker, this is a sad day in U.S. history when we have to vote of the office of the presidency in his attempt to cheat his way to re-election. The facts are uncontested. Fact 1, the president abused the power of his office by attempting to shake down the president of a country that has been our ally. Trump wanted President Zelensky dirt on Vice President Biden because he sees him as the biggest threat to his re-election. Fact 2, and announce an investigation of Biden, hoping the mere announcement would create doubt about Biden and strengthen Trump's hand in the 2020 election. Fact 3, Trump obstructed Congress, congressional subpoenas, and has blocked current and past employees from testifying before congressional committees. Congress is a co-equal branch of government, and one of our central responsibilities is to provide oversight and investigation of the administration. So no one branch would have unchecked power. The House of Representatives has no choice but to vote and pass articles of impeachment because President Trump has abused his power and obstructed the ability of Congress from performing our constitutional duty. The urgency to move there is no reason to believe President Trump won't continue to abuse the power of his office, continue to put his foot on the scale of his re-election. And in fact, his attorney just returned from in the New Yorker magazine confesses to continuing the effort to interfere in the election. In many of our congressional districts, we worry about voter suppression and from participating in the election, or we worry about Russian interference in our election. It is a sad day in America when we have to worry about the commander-in-chief. Should be decided by the American people. I will vote for both articles of impeachment. It is my constitutional duty that fulfill my oath of office. No one is above the law.
Gentleman from Georgia. Gentleman's recognized for 2 minutes.
I discovered something recently. It's shocking, I know, but it turns out that some people don't like President Trump. They think sometimes he's rude to people, and to their sensitive natures, they've been offended. I get that, I really do. But let's be clear, this vote, this day, has nothing to do with Ukraine. It has nothing to do with abuse of power. It has This day is about one thing and one thing only. They hate this president. They hate those of us who voted for him. They think we're stupid. They think we made a mistake. They think Hillary Clinton should vote is about. They want to take away my vote and throw it in the trash. They want to take away my president and delegitimize him so that he cannot be reelected. This investigation, what nonsense. You've been trying to impeach this president since before he was sworn into office. Before he was sworn into office. This isn't something you're approaching prayerfully and mournfully and sadly. Oh, the chaos, oh, the sadness. This is something years. And it's very clear. You don't have to go back and Google very much to find out that is the absolute truth. I could give you pages of examples of things you have said for 3 years about this. And if you think if this impeachment is successful, the next president, I promise you, is going to be impeached. And the next president after that, if you set this bar as being impeachable, every president in ways that our founding fathers recognized, they got it right. High crimes and misdemeanors. Other than that, settle it at the ballot box. I look forward to that day. Let the American people decide.
Members are
Reserve.
Madam Speaker, I would remind the gentleman that if President Trump is impeached and removed, the new president will be Mike Pence, not Hillary Clinton. I now yield 2 minutes to the distinguished gentlelady from Florida.
the gentleman yields 2 minutes.
2 minutes.
Gentleladies recognized for 2 minutes.
Madam Speaker, I did not have the privilege of being born into this country. My mother brought me from Ecuador looking for. This is a story that I share with so many people that live in Florida's 26th district and all over the country. We've left and experienced corruption in our countries of birth where brutal dictatorships have choked their potential. Elected by the American people has violated his oath of office and violated the rule of law. The evidence is overwhelming that he withheld military a White House meeting to extract a political favor from a foreign government. The president actively sought foreign election interference to benefit. Has abused his power and obstructed Congress. He presents a clear and present danger to our democracy. As an immigrant, extraordinary country. The genius of American democracy lies in our Constitution and the dedication to the rule of law. I want my children and all of our children to feel the same way when they grow up. However, begin to appear in our democratic institutions, our children will be in the same situation like so many of us experienced when we left countries whose leaders destroyed democracy. Both to defend our Constitution. That is my duty as a member of this body. That is my duty as a mother. I yield back.
At this time, I yield a minute and a half to the gentleman from New York, Mr. King.
Gentleman is recognized for a minute and a half.
Thank you, gentlemen, for yielding. Madam Speaker, I rise today in strong opposition to the articles of impeachment against President Trump. As Chairman Nadler must recall, I spoke on this floor in opposition to the impeachment of President Clinton. And 21 years ago tomorrow, I voted against all 4 articles of impeachment against President Trump are an assault on our Constitution and the American people. To impeach a president for a phone call for which no crime is charged, never mind a high crime, and asserting his constitutional prerogatives is it sets the dangerous precedent of weaponizing impeachment to undo the solemn decision of the American people. Madam Speaker, President Trump and I grew up in the same borough of New York City. And on these horrible acts of impeachment, these articles of impeachment, I yield back the balance of my time and strongly urge a no vote.
Gentleman yields back.
I reserve.
Gentleman.
Yield 2.5 minutes to the gentlelady from California, Ms. Lofgren.
Gentlelady is recognized for 2.5 minutes.
Madam Speaker, the President and members of Congress each take an oath to uphold the Constitution, to upend the constitutional order. We have an obligation to live up to our oath of office. We've been presented with direct evidence about the President's actions. They threaten our national security and articles of impeachment for abuse of power and contempt of Congress as a result of that evidence. I've worked on presidential impeachments as part of the Judiciary Committee twice before. This third time brings me no joy. Broke into the Democratic Party headquarters to get a leg up on the election, and then, just like President Trump, he tried to cover it up. Then he resigned. This is even worse. President Trump he used a foreign government to do it. He used military aid provided to fight the Russians as leverage, solely to benefit his own political campaign. He warned against the insidious wiles of foreign influence. The direct evidence is damning. The President hasn't offered any evidence to the contrary. These actions constitute grounds before us is a serious abuse of power and obstruction of Congress. These abuses strike at the heart of our Constitution. Constitutional abuse of power, a high crime and misdemeanor, is ongoing. He related to the impeachment inquiry. It's our responsibility to use the tool our founders gave us in the Constitution to preserve the constitutional order.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. At this time, I yield 1.5 minutes to the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Rouser.
Gentleman's recognized for 1.5 minutes.
Madam Speaker, the Washington Post headlined a story immediately following President Trump taking the has begun. How accurate they were. Here we are almost 3 years later, and what we are witnessing today is unprecedented in American history. A very partisan-based impeachment with no facts that warrant it. This is an impeachment for a man for whom many of my colleagues on the other side detest. Not all, but many. Nowhere in the Constitution does it say that personal disdain is grounds for impeachment. False. Early on, it was claimed there was evidence of Russian collusion. There was none. We were told the FBI didn't abuse the FISA process in its investigation of the Trump campaign. Then, when the Russian collusion hoax collapsed, we were told that we would hear from a whistleblower that had details of a nefarious call between the president and the president of Ukraine. Then we find out they weren't even on the call, and we still don't even know who the whistleblower is. After reading the transcript, it is obvious that you have to make assumptions that wouldn't even stand up in traffic court to come to that conclusion. Instead, the indisputable facts of record destroy their case. And though they allege treason and bribery by the president, the articles we are obstruction of Congress because they found no evidence of treason or
Gentleman's
bribery
time's
or anything
expired.
else for that matter. Mr. Speaker, today is a very
Gentleman's
sad
time's
day for our
expired.
republic.
Gentleman from New York.
The country is now
Recognized.
The country is now more divided than it ever has been in my lifetime. The truth has been trampled by this House of Representatives and the Department of Justice. More Americans have an even dimmer view of very important American institutions. Thankfully, the lens of
Gentleman from New York.
Madam Speaker, one specific concern of the framers was a president who would corrupt our elections, who would abuse the great powers of his office to ensure his own re-election, to overturn an election. It is a reaffirmation of the simple truth that in the United States of America, no person, not even the president, is above the law, and our democracy cannot allow a duly elected president to abuse political gain. And I now yield 2.5 minutes to the gentlelady from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee.
Gentlelady's recognized.
I hate no woman or man. Today, the American people should receive clarity and truth. The Constitution is the highest law of the land. The President breached and violated. The President committed constitutional crimes. The President's crimes are impeachable. John F. Kennedy said, if this country should ever reach the point where any man or group of men by force or threat of force could defy the commands of our stand free from doubt, and no citizen would be safe from his neighbors. The facts are undisputed. First, President Trump violated his oath of office by placing his personal political interests above the a potential election opponent. Second, President Trump betrayed the nation by interest by withholding the congressionally agreed $391 million to a fragile ally against of the scheme concocted by the president was to enlist a foreign country to help in the 2020 election. These acts are constitutional crimes and abuse of power. The truth is, the president did ask for a favor. Those were his own words. No mention of corruption, only the mention of the Bidens. The president was engaged in wrongdoing and is a clear and present danger. He has a pattern in his behavior to America's national security. The truth is that abuse of power does violate the Constitution while both corrupting and cheating our American democracy. His acts betrayed the nation laws faithfully. This is the truth. Why does the truth matter? Because it matters to the farmer at his or her plow. It matters to the waitress America. It matters to the teacher in a 5th grade class. It matters to a mother kissing off her military recruit going off to war. The Constitution must be preserved. Our laws must be honored and respected. The bloodshed and sacrifice of fellow Americans actions on the vote taken today must be for no personal gain or grandeur. The bright light of this constitutional democracy has been dimmed because of his acts. The truth is no longer for all. It is his way. We must reject that abuse of power because this is not America. No one is above the law. Alexander Hamilton said impeachment was violation of public trust. The president has violated the trust. We must impeach
Who seeks recognition?
Donald J. Trump.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Mitchell.
Gentleman's recognized for a minute and a half.
Today, the House of Representatives votes on 2 articles of impeachment for President Trump. Members and all Americans must recognize that impeachment was only when a president acts in such an immoral and blatantly unlawful manner as to threaten the very basis of our republic. As we cast votes on these articles, must be carefully considered. The issue is not whether we agree with or like the president's rhetoric, political tactics, use of Twitter, policy choices, or his political rallies. One of our founders, Alexander Hamilton, warned of impeachment becoming a solely partisan act in the Federalist Papers. This impeachment inquiry and these articles, these proceedings are weaponizing impeachment, making it another election tool. I've carefully examined the evidence presented throughout the inquiry, history, our founding documents, and our future. It is clear President Trump's actions, as described in these articles, do not constitute treason. Misdemeanors. You simply don't like him. I'll be voting no on these articles and will hope someday. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from New York.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 2 minutes to the
Madam Speaker, President Trump on January 20th, 2017 raised his hand and swore to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. Now we must preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution from him. I rise today not to disparage and embarrass the President of the United States, but to defend our precious democracy. I speak today not because I hate. I have heard Republicans say, why are we rushing to judgment? This is not a rush to judgment. It's a rush to justice, and we must not delay. Corruption is corrosive. It eats away like acid to do irreparable harm to our country and our democracy. Just last week, Rudy Giuliani was back at it in Ukraine. So please don't tell us to wait, because the corruption continues. There's a famous election. Statesmen worry about the next generation. Today calls upon us to be statesmen and stateswomen, Democrat, Republican, and independent. Our election is under attack from within. So to many of whom spend a lifetime trying to build a reputation of honesty and courage, I beg you, don't throw that away for President Trump. He doesn't deserve it. The next tweet or next week. My fear, my prediction is that his actions will continue. Madam Speaker, he also bragged that he could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and get away with it. Well, he's shooting holes in our Constitution on Pennsylvania Avenue. And our house, the People's House, must defend the Constitution from a domestic enemy. Because I don't want generations to come to blame me for letting our democracy die, I therefore rise in faith. Back.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. At this point, I yield a minute and a half to the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Lukemeyer.
Gentleman's recognized for a minute and a half.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's tormented our country for nearly 3 years. If there was ever any doubt that this entire illegitimate investigation is 100% politically motivated, earlier this month, Speaker Pelosi actually admitted the impeachment process began 2.5 years ago. Let me say that again. The Speaker of the House said the day he got elected simply because it was not the outcome they wanted. Another of my Democrat colleagues publicly admitted in May that the driving force behind their actions was, and I quote, "If we don't impeach the president, he'll get political crusade." In order to arrive at their Stalinistic, predetermined conclusion, House Democrats spent the last several months staging well-rehearsed hearings where the charges were drawn up by their own focus groups, judge and jury. Even with the odds so blatantly stacked against the president, Democrats still came up with absolutely nothing. A while ago, the Speaker spoke of the Pledge of Allegiance. The pledge is justice for all. Justice was not something afforded the president during the investigation. He was denied due process, something the Supreme Court said should be afforded. That makes this process illegal and illegitimate. What a shame. What a sham. With that, I yield back.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 2 minutes to the gentlelady from Texas, Ms. Garcia.
Gentlelady is recognized for 2 minutes.
To impeach the president, even when he separated babies from their parents at the border, even when he didn't call for impeachment, because I'm here to make a difference in the lives of my constituents. Yet here we are in the middle of a constitutional crisis. As a former judge, evidence and determine if the president's actions were impeachable. Unfortunately, the evidence in the intelligence and judiciary reports leaves us with no choice but to impeach the president. So Constitution and to the American people. And today, I urge my colleagues to stand by their oaths too. The framers of the Constitution included impeachment. Misconduct could destroy the very foundations of our country. Donald J. Trump abused his power when he obstructed Congress and ordered government. Donald J. Trump corrupted our election when he asked a foreign government to interfere for his personal and political gain. Today, their party over our country, or will you help save our democracy and vote yes on the articles of impeachment before you?
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I do have an inquiry as to the time remaining for both sides.
Gentleman from New York has 2 hours and 27.5 minutes left.
Pulled ahead. Okay. Thank you, Madam Speaker. At this point, it is my, I yield now to 1.5 minutes to the gentleman.
For 1.5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I thank the gentleman for yielding. And I start out first that this is the largest, most massive cover-up of such a list of crimes against our country. And to go so far as to bring impeachment hearings to try to cover all of when Barack Obama said Hillary Clinton would never intend to jeopardize our national security. Again, the following April, the next month, Peter Strzok wrote the statement that was delivered by James Comey, and they spent Democrat money and Hillary Clinton money. Biden goes to Ukraine and makes the statement, here's $1 billion, but you must do what I tell you to do. You're accusing Donald Trump of doing that which Joe Biden has confessed to doing. And by the way, Donald Trump, he's in a 21-way primary for Democrats. He's running third in that race. His opponents are the other 20 Democrats. How would anybody dig into that mess of 21 people and decide he's going to go overseas? A motive, then you create the dots, then you go dot to dot. But the reality is that it was Biden that was doing the extortion of the power play in order to protect his own son. And it was Donald Trump that was following the law that said you have to ensure that there's not a violent war going on in Ukraine, and that's when we sent blankets and MREs over there under Barack Obama. But when I hear this from the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Johnson, he doesn't think he can win the election fair and square, so he would cheat. And I've heard that here on this floor. Proponent of impeachment is Al Green of Texas, and he said those very same things, and they brought this case November 9th, the day after Trump was elected. I yield back.
I yield. Reserve.
Gentleman from New York.
I now yield 2 minutes to the gentlelady from Pennsylvania, Ms. Dean.
Gentlelady is recognized for 2 minutes.
Madam Speaker, words matter.
We've heard many words over the course of these last weeks. Still, what strikes me are the words that are missing from my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. A gay cannot or will not mouth defending a president's conduct that threatens our constitutional order. And so, Speaker, I ask, when is it ever right for a president in our elections? When is it ever right for a president to intimidate a foreign leader into announcing false investigations? When is it ever right for that president to withhold congressionally appropriated aid to that country at the expense of its national security, and right for a president to block a co-equal branch of government from investigating the scheme to cheat an election? The answer, of course, is never. But that word who are making the choice to stand behind a man whose behavior is not worthy of your tortured words. By our vote today, we are speaking to future presidents and to future generations. We will not tolerate foreign interference in our presidential elections. Americans alone will determine the outcome, and we will not permit a president to order the complete And in the end, regardless of the outcome of this impeachment, the president's tenure will end, and this body and our grandchildren today. Ours is a somber generational duty about love of country and lifting a Constitution to its gravest protections but its highest aspirations. Guard our Constitution. Mine is clear. I thank you, Madam Speaker, and yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As I've reminded many times, we have followed the sham process that we've had to deal with. That if you want to talk about elections, remember it was the Speaker of the House that said we can't trust the voters it's too dangerous to leave it with the voters for President Trump next year. With that, I yield 2 minutes to the gentlelady.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As you all know, I serve on both the Judiciary Committee and Rules Committee, and I have literally spent hours poring over testimony, looking at documents from all of that. This impeachment is a total joke and a total sham. And let me tell you one of the reasons why I think witnesses that the Democrats brought forward, not one single one of them was able to establish that President Trump committed bribery, treason, high crimes, or misdemeanors. And again, 17 out of 24 Democrat members on Judiciary Committee voted on this floor to move forward articles of impeachment. And 5 out of 9 Rule Committee Democrat members did the same thing. So if the main part of your impeachment is the call, why did you vote for impeachment? I want to remind the American public and others that for 2 years, Adam Schiff claimed he had proof to be false. And then overnight, it was obstruction of justice, then quid pro quo, then bribery, then extortion. And the list goes on, but yet not one of those is listed in the articles of impeachment. To my Democrat, stop tearing the country apart. Stop this sham. And I yield back.
Reserve. Gentleman from New York.
Trump's behavior is not new. He has a pattern of engaging in misconduct and then obstructing any investigation into his misconduct to cover up his actions and hide the truth from the American people. I now yield to the gentlelady from California, Ms. Roybal Allard, for the purpose.
Nice. Okay, Madam Speaker, I rise in support of today's impeachment proceedings and ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
From Rhode Island, Mr. Langevin.
I thank the gentleman for. Our nation was founded on certain principles: that government should be of, by, and for the people; that a system of three co-equal branches of government would provide the checks and balances voices are heard, and that no one is above the law. Today, sadly, we are voting to impeach President Donald John Trump. In doing so, we are using the powers the Founding Fathers enshrined in the Constitution to address a president who has violated his oath of office. The evidence is clear and the facts are not in question. President Trump is consistently with the rule of law. He has refused to take responsibility for his actions. He has undermined the checks and balances we rely on by obstructing Congress at every turn. By using his office to solicit foreign interference in our elections, undermining the will of the people. So on this sad day for our nation, I will do what the President has so often failed to do, and I will fulfill my oath to support and defend the government. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. At this time, it is my pleasure to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Ohio.
Is a sad day in our nation's history as House Democrats are poised to approve on a strictly party line vote articles of impeachment based on what constitutional scholar Jonathan Turley called wafer-thin evidence. This will set the norm rather than the exception. That's not what our founding fathers intended. They wanted impeachment to be rare. They set a high bar for impeachment: treason, bribery, high crimes, and misdemeanors. The first article is not a high crime and misdemeanor. In fact, it's not even a crime. And since there's no majority party in the House can designate nearly any disagreement with the president from now on an impeachable offense. The second article alleged obstruction of Congress. Asserting executive privilege, a practice that began with George Washington, is not obstruction of Congress. Rather, it's a function of the essential checks and balances contemplated under the Constitution. Here's what nearly every grade Democrats do not. If Congress disagrees with the president, if they don't agree with the president, take it to court. Let the third branch of government decide. They're the refs. The House has never, I repeat, versus an article of impeachment. But that's going to change today. Today, House Democrats are pursuing a wacky constitutional theory under which all four presidents on Mount Rushmore could have been impeached. If all of this sounds absurd, Madam Speaker, it's because it is absurd and has been from the outset. But here's what's not absurd, but rather frightening. House Democrats today will be immune from impeachment, and that will forever negatively tarnish the history of this House. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from
His conduct constituted the highest of high crimes against our country. An offense does not have to violate a criminal statute to be impeachable. That was confirmed in President Nixon's case and again in President Clinton's. There is no higher crime than for the president to use the power of his office to corrupt our elections.
Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This July, President Trump blocked $400 million in congressionally approved aid that Ukraine desperately needed to defend itself against Russia, because the President of Ukraine to launch a public investigation into a political rival, military aid and other benefits would only come after. But this is not about a single call or a single transcript. This is about a perfect storm, months of appointees, an orchestrated plan demanding a foreign power interfere in our democracy. President Trump betrayed his oath of office. He abused the power of his office for personal and political gain and has refused to cooperate with a co-equal branch of government. This is a vote for our future presidents, Democrat or Republican. Donald Trump must be held accountable for his actions. Today, we send a clear signal to this president and all future presidents.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. At this time, I yield a minute and a half to the gentleman from Kansas, Mr. Marshall.
Gentleman's recognized for a minute and a half.
I rise today in opposition to the impeachment of the legitimately elected President of the United States. Enough. Madam Speaker, for the love of this country, enough. Enough of this impeachment. Witch hunts. I'm voting no because the President has done nothing wrong. The only thing that President Trump is guilty of is doing the honest. They tell us the only thing President Trump is guilty of is not being Hillary Clinton. The only party guilty of obstruction, abuse of power, or whatever focus group term they're using today is the party on the other side of the will of the American people. They're obstructing the very foundations of our country by politically weaponizing impeachment and abused our Constitution. They alone will bear this responsibility. Madam Speaker, they'll fail. It's past time to be done with this circus and get to the work that matters, like securing our borders and passing trade deals. I will vote no and encourage this body to move on from this heartbreaking, disgraceful day.
Back. Gentleman from New York.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Price.
Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
The moment our founders anticipated in establishing the power of impeachment has arrived. The evidence is clear. President Trump abused his power by asking a vulnerable foreign leader and a baseless Russian conspiracy theory, while withholding congressionally appropriated defense aid and a coveted White House visit. He then blocked congressional investigation into these abuses. These abuses threaten the and they undermine national security. We sometimes regard constitutional checks and balances as the indestructible underpinnings of our democracy. In fact, they're not fixed. They're not in no doubt. It's up to the Congress, the first branch of government, to apply the remedy that the Constitution prescribes, because the threats to our democracy are real and present. With this, including the President, is above the law.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Gentleman's recognized for a minute and a half.
Since the beginning of this impeachment inquiry, it's been extremely troubling to see the partisan, divisive way in which we shouldn't be surprised, though. They promised they'd unseat this president since the day he took his oath of office. From the start, this has been a baseless attempt to undo President Trump. I can tell you, the people I represent in Kentucky, the very people who voted for this president to enact change and fight for this country, are appalled at the charade they've seen in the House, appalled at the actions from House Democrats who have failed to even come close to proving their case. They are setting by voting in favor of this sham process and these illegitimate articles of impeachment. These articles were written and built on a report that was drafted with biased presumptions, cherry-picked witnesses, and vastly disputed facts. Any impeachable offense. And it's clear for all of us to see through the now very well-known transcript. This rigged process sets a concerning precedent for impeachable offenses moving forward. Oppose these baseless articles of impeachment. And I yield back.
From New York.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the gentleman from California, Mr. Peters.
Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
It is not bipartisan, but that's on my Republican colleagues. Republicans have not sought the truth. They have sought to avoid the truth. They have demeaned and insulted witnesses, patriots, warriors, career diplomats who provide. No House Republican has joined us to demand the documents and witnesses that President Trump has refused to produce. And Senate Republican leaders this week, and there will and condemn the abuse of power, or to work with us to prevent this ongoing behavior in the future. And that's the tragedy of today's events. In our nation's history, thousands of Americans have gone into battle without reservation. Many have been gravely injured, and some have made the ultimate sacrifice. But today, in contrast, for fear of losing an election, my colleagues will not speak up for the rule of law or against presidential abuse of power. Voters I will vote for the articles of impeachment. I yield back.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It is my privilege now to yield a minute and a half to the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Loudermilk.
Gentleman's recognized.
Friend, Mr. Collins. Madam Speaker, I rise today in opposition not only to these articles of impeachment, but in strong opposition to the process that has brought us to this point. Our Constitution and Bill of Rights are all could accuse anyone of any crime at any time, even without compelling evidence. That's why the 5th and the 14th Amendments established a bedrock principle of innocent until proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. But on November the 14th, Speaker Pelosi informed the press that the president should prove his innocence, then he should make that known. The Constitution also guarantees that the accused can call witnesses to testify on their behalf, but the Republicans and the president were continually denied that right throughout this process. The 6th Amendment, the Democrats prohibited Republicans and the president from questioning the so-called whistleblower. His identity has been kept secret. Before you take this historic vote today, 1 week before Christmas, I want you to keep this in mind. Pontius Pilate gave Jesus the opportunity to face his accusers. During that sham trial, Pontius Pilate afforded more rights to Jesus than the Democrats have afforded this president and this.
Gentleman from New York.
The president was given the opportunity to come and testify before the Judiciary Committee, to send his counsel to question. I now yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Kildee.
Nice for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This is democracy. The president has abused the powers of his office, betrayed the public trust, and undermined America's national security by pressuring a foreign government to interfere in our elections for his own. In this moment in our history, the Constitution is clear. The remedy for such misconduct to Congress to impeach a president of the United States. But sadly, the president's misconduct leaves us no choice but to follow the Constitution. I have 2 grandchildren. My grandson is 4. Someday, a long time from now, they'll ask me about this day. They'll ask about the time a president put himself above the law. I did to stop him. And I will have an answer for them. Today, I vote to uphold the Constitution. I will vote to impeach.
From Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It is interesting that the president was supposedly given rights in the Judiciary Committee, but maybe who would he have asked questions of? 3 law school professors and a staff member? Not a lot of due process.
Recognized for 1.5 minutes.
Madam Speaker, we're here today because House Democrats have spent upwards of $30 million in 3 years trying to overturn the 2016